You want me to what? Admiral Cathax's facial tentacles writhed in disbelief as he stared at the holographic transmission from High Command. Escort the human diplomatic delegation, Supreme Commander Vizith repeated, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with barely contained irritation. And before you start listing the many reasons why this is beneath your station, may I remind you that these humans have managed to do what our entire battle fleet couldn't achieve in 3 centuries. Cathax's outer membrane rippled in what passed for a sneer among the Zelaxians. They got lucky. One primitive species stumbling upon a solution doesn't make them worthy of— They didn't stumble upon anything, Vizith interrupted. They deliberately engineered a biological agent that turns the Ravagers' own adaptive capabilities against them. In 2 months, they accomplished what our finest minds couldn't theorize in 300 years. The Admiral's tentacles drooped slightly. He knew where this was going, and he didn't like it one bit. So yes, you will escort them. You will treat them with every courtesy. And you will remember that these primitives are the reason we're all still alive to have this conversation. Vizith's tone left no room for argument. Understood? Understood, Supreme Commander. Cathax managed to keep most of the bitterness out of his voice. When do they arrive? They're already here. The transmission ended, leaving Cathax alone with his thoughts and his wounded pride. 300 years of military service, commanding the most advanced warships in known space, and now he was being reduced to a glorified tour guide for a species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel. He made his way to the diplomatic docking bay, his honor guard falling into formation behind him. The human ship was already there, a blocky, inelegant thing that looked more like a floating factory than a proper spacecraft. Cathax watched as the airlock cycled, preparing himself for whatever bizarre form these humans would take. The door opened, and out stepped disappointment incarnate. They were bipedal, mostly hairless except for patches on their heads, and wearing what appeared to be cloth coverings that did nothing to enhance their natural defenses. No claws, no significant teeth, no apparent natural weapons at all. Cathax felt his earlier disdain returning in full force. Admiral Cathax? The lead human extended one of its upper appendages. I'm Dr. Michael Thompson, head of the Xenopathology Division at the United Earth Coalition. This is Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Rodriguez, our military liaison, and Dr. James Williams, our chief research analyst. Cathax stared at the extended appendage until Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez cleared her throat and whispered something to Thompson, who quickly lowered his hand. Right, sorry. Different cultural protocols. We're honored to be here, Admiral. I understand you'll be showing us around the facilities. Indeed. Cathax kept his response clipped and professional. If you'll follow me, we'll begin with the primary research laboratories where your solution will be mass-produced. As they walked, Cathax couldn't help but notice how the humans kept stopping to examine everything with almost childlike curiosity. They asked questions about the most basic things. The composition of the corridor walls, the mechanism behind the gravity generators, even the atmospheric recycling systems. It was like giving a tour to particularly inquisitive larvae. Fascinating, Williams muttered, making notes on a primitive digital device. Your entire station's infrastructure is based on crystalline computing? The energy efficiency must be incredible. It is adequate for our needs, Cathax replied dismissively. Now, if we could focus on the matter at hand. Oh, absolutely, Thompson agreed cheerfully. But you have to understand, everything we learn here could help us improve our own systems back home. The better we understand each other's technology, the more effectively we can work together against the Ravagers. Cathax's tentacles twitched. The Ravagers are already defeated, thanks to your biological weapon. There is no need for further collaboration. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Defeated? Admiral, we've barely started. Sure, we found a way to turn their rapid adaptation against them, but that's just one tool. What happens when they evolve immunity to it? Because they will. That's what they do. We need to be ready with the next solution, and the one after that. They cannot evolve immunity to complete cellular breakdown, Cathax insisted. Our scientists have confirmed. Your scientists are working with incomplete data, Williams interrupted, not unkindly. We've already detected 3 distinct mutation patterns in the latest samples. Give them another month, maybe 2, and they'll have a workaround. That's why we're here, to help you prepare for round 2. Cathax stopped walking. You knew this would happen? Of course, Thompson said. It's literally in their name, Ravagers. They adapt, they evolve, they overcome, just like every other predatory species in the universe. The trick isn't to find one perfect solution. It's to keep changing the rules of the game faster than they can learn them. Which is why, Rodriguez added, we brought along some interesting ideas about combining your crystalline computing with our quantum systems to create predictive models of their evolutionary patterns, among other things. Cathax's outer membrane flushed with colors that indicated deep thought. You deliberately created a temporary solution when you could have engineered something more permanent? A permanent solution would have been devastating to the galactic ecosystem, Williams explained. The Ravagers are awful, yes, but they're also part of the natural order. Completely eliminating them would have consequences we can't even predict. Instead, we created something that would force them to expend so much evolutionary energy adapting that they'd have to retreat and recover. It gives us time to prepare for their next iteration. And you didn't think to mention this earlier? Cathax's tentacles were practically tying themselves in knots. Thompson shrugged. Would you have listened? No offense, Admiral, but your species tends to prefer definitive solutions. We thought it would be easier to demonstrate our approach first, then explain the strategy once you saw it working. For the first time, Cathax looked at the humans. Really looked at them. No natural weapons, no significant defenses, no impressive physical capabilities. And yet, you're predators, he said suddenly, the revelation hitting him like a plasma burst. Rodriguez grinned. Persistence hunters, technically. Our ancestors would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We're not the strongest, fastest, or toughest species out there, but we're really, really good at playing the long game. That's why your solution worked, Cathax continued, his scientific training finally overriding his prejudice. You didn't try to overpower the Ravagers. We just made them tire themselves out, Thompson confirmed. And while they're recovering, we're here to help you prepare for round 2. Because trust me, Admiral, it's coming. The question is, are we going to work together this time, or do we have to save the galaxy again by ourselves? The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, his facial tentacles arranged themselves into the Xylaxian equivalent of a smile. Perhaps, he said carefully, we should start by taking a more detailed look at those laboratories. I believe you mentioned something about quantum computing. Now you're getting it, Rodriguez said with a wink. Lead the way, Admiral. As they continued their tour, Cathax found himself re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about humanity. They weren't impressive physical specimens. They didn't have advanced natural weapons. Their technology was, in many ways, centuries behind the Xylaxian standard. But they understood something that his species, for all their advancement, had missed. Sometimes the most effective predator isn't the one with the sharpest claws or the deadliest venom. Sometimes it's the one that can think 3 moves ahead, that can turn its very limitations into advantages, that can see the bigger picture while everyone else is focused on the immediate threat. By the end of the day, Cathax had made a decision. He sent a private message to Supreme Commander Vizith. Request permission to establish permanent joint research initiative with human scientific teams. They are not what we thought they were. The response came back almost immediately. Permission granted. And Admiral, try not to look so surprised when they save us all again. Cathax's facial tentacles performed the complex gesture that indicated rueful amusement. The humans had earned his respect not through strength or technology, or even their initial victory over the Ravagers, but through something far more impressive. They had made him think differently about the nature of survival itself. As he watched them huddled over a holographic display, enthusiastically discussing possible improvements to the station's defensive systems, Cathax realized that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their ingenuity or their persistence or even their ability to think long-term. It was their capacity to make other species see the universe through new eyes, even if those species happened to have superior optical organs in the first place. The Ravagers would return, yes, but this time, they wouldn't be facing a collection of disparate civilizations trying to overpower them through brute force. They would be facing an alliance that had learned to think like humans, creatively, adaptively, and with the understanding that victory doesn't always mean destroying your enemy. Sometimes it just means making them work harder than you do. And that, Cathax reflected as he joined the humans in their planning session, was a lesson worth learning, even if it had taken him 3 centuries and a species of barely space-capable bipeds to figure it out. The next time the Ravagers emerged from whatever corner of space they were licking their wounds in, they would find something far more dangerous than advanced technology or powerful weapons waiting for them. They would find humans, and all the species who had learned to think like them. Cathax almost felt sorry for them. Admiral Cathax, we have a situation. The urgent message jolted Cathax from his meditation cycle. 6 standard months had passed since the human delegation's arrival. and he had grown accustomed to their peculiar methods. But something in Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez's tone made his outer membrane ripple with concern. Define situation, Colonel. Our deep space monitoring network just picked up something interesting. You might want to see this yourself. Cathax found the humans in the newly established Joint Strategic Command Center. The facility represented everything that had changed in the past half-year. Xelaxian crystalline computers worked in perfect harmony with human quantum processors, creating prediction models of unprecedented accuracy. Dr. Williams was already there, his usual enthusiasm replaced by focused concentration. "Show me," Cathax ordered. The holographic display materialized, showing a region of space near the former Ravager territory. At first glance, it appeared empty, but then Cathax's superior optical organs detected the subtle distortion. "They're back," Williams said quietly. "But they're different." Different was an understatement. The Ravager ships had always been organic mechanical hybrids, but these new vessels seemed to bend the very light around them. Their biological components had evolved to incorporate properties of space-time itself. "Fascinating," Cathax murmured. "They've adapted to manipulate gravitational fields at a cellular level. Our previous countermeasures would be useless." "That's not the fascinating part," Rodriguez interjected. "Watch this." The display zoomed in on one of the Ravager ships. Its surface rippled in a pattern that made Cathax's tentacles curl in recognition. "They're mimicking our crystalline technology," he realized. "They've somehow incorporated elements of Xelaxian ship design into their evolution." "Not just yours." Dr. Thompson entered the room, tablet in hand. "Analysis shows traces of at least 3 other species' technological signatures in their new configuration. They're not just adapting anymore. They're synthesizing multiple technological approaches into their biological matrix." Cathax felt a familiar sense of despair beginning to creep in. "Then we've failed. If they can simply absorb and improve upon our technology..." Rodriguez's exasperated tone cut through his spiral of defeat. "Admiral, with all due respect, this is exactly what we planned for." "I beg your pardon?" Thompson stepped forward, pulling up another set of data streams. "Remember when we said our first solution was deliberately temporary? This is why. We needed to see how they'd adapt, what directions their evolution would take. Now we know." "And this helps us how exactly?" Williams grinned. "Because they're doing exactly what humans did thousands of years ago. They're learning to use tools. The difference is, they're incorporating them directly into their biology, and that makes them vulnerable in a whole new way." Cathax's facial tentacles arranged themselves into an expression of confusion. "I fail to see how this is an advantage." "Think about it," Rodriguez urged. "What happens when you become completely dependent on a tool? When it's not just something you use, but part of what you are?" Understanding dawned. "You become constrained by that tool's limitations." "Exactly." Thompson was practically bouncing with excitement. "They've locked themselves into a specific evolutionary path. Yes, it's an incredibly powerful one, but it's also predictable. And more importantly, it's technology we understand." "The crystalline computing they've mimicked," Cathax said slowly. "It has very specific vulnerabilities to quantum interference." "Now you're getting it." Williams pulled up another display, this one showing a modified version of their original countermeasure. "We don't need to attack their biology anymore. We can target the technological components they've integrated into themselves. Components we literally helped design." Cathax studied the data, his scientific training mixing with his 3 centuries of military experience. "This could work, but they'll adapt again." "Of course they will," Rodriguez said cheerfully. "That's the point. Every time they adapt, they have to commit more resources to maintaining their new forms. Eventually, they'll exhaust themselves." Cathax finished. "Just like your first strategy, but on a larger scale." "Exactly." Thompson brought up a final set of projections. "We're not trying to win a single battle. We're playing a game of evolutionary chicken with an enemy that doesn't realize it's burning through its resources faster than it can replenish them." For the first time, Cathax truly understood why humans had survived despite their apparent physical limitations. They didn't just plan for the next battle or the next war. They planned for the next 1,000 moves in a game their opponents didn't even know they were playing. "Supreme Commander Vizith needs to see this," he declared. "All of it. And I believe we should consider expanding the Joint Strategic Command to include representatives from every major species in the Alliance." "Why, Admiral?" Rodriguez teased. "Are you suggesting we turn this into a proper interstellar coalition?" "I am suggesting," Cathax replied with dignity, That humans have proven themselves adept at teaching other species to think differently. Perhaps it's time we institutionalize that process. Integration through innovation, Williams mused. I like it. As do I, a new voice announced. Supreme Commander Vizith's hologram materialized in the center of the room. Because the Ravagers aren't the only threat out there, are they, humans? Thompson's expression turned serious. No, ma'am. They're just the most immediate one. Then perhaps it's time we discussed the real reason Earth was so prepared for the Ravagers, Vizith continued, and why your species developed such interesting approaches to survival. The humans exchanged glances. Finally, Rodriguez spoke. With all due respect, Supreme Commander, are you sure the Alliance is ready for that conversation? Thanks to you, Colonel, they're readier than they've ever been. Vizith's bioluminescent patches pulsed with what Cathax recognized as grim amusement. Besides, if we're going to face what's coming, we'll need every advantage we can get, including the truth about humanity's first contact. Cathax's tentacles went rigid. First contact, but we were— No, Admiral, Thompson said quietly. You weren't. And that's a very, very long story. One that explains quite a bit about why we approach things the way we do. As the humans began their explanation, Cathax reflected that he really should have learned by now. With humans, there was always another layer to the story, always another plan within the plan, and somehow that was the most reassuring thought he'd had all day. The Ravagers were returning, yes, but they were returning to face an alliance that had learned to think in human terms, in layers and contingencies, in long-term strategies and carefully planned evolutionary traps. They were returning to face an enemy that had turned their greatest strength, their adaptability, into a vulnerability. And after that, well, after that, they would all face whatever it was that had taught humanity to be so very, very good at surviving. Cathax found himself looking forward to it. After all, he had learned from the best. The truth is, Dr. Thompson began, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of deep space before them. Humanity's first contact wasn't peaceful. It wasn't diplomatic. And it certainly wasn't with any of the species currently represented in the Alliance. Supreme Commander Vizith's bioluminescent patches pulsed in a pattern that indicated intense focus. Admiral Cathax noticed that even his honor guard had moved closer, their usual stoic demeanor replaced by undisguised curiosity. We called them the Architects, Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez continued, pulling up a series of classified files on her quantum-enhanced tablet, though that name doesn't really do justice to what they were. Or what they did to us. The holographic display shifted, showing Earth as it had appeared 3 centuries ago. Then the image changed, revealing massive structures in orbit, geometric shapes that seemed to defy the laws of physics, constructions that made even the most advanced Zelaxian technology look primitive by comparison. They arrived without warning, Dr. Williams explained, his usual enthusiastic tone subdued. No communication, no demands, no apparent interest in interaction of any kind. They simply appeared and began experimenting. Experimenting? Cathax's tentacles writhed with growing unease. On your planet? On everything, Thompson corrected. The atmosphere, the oceans, the planet's magnetic field. And yes, on us. They treated the entire Earth and everything on it as one giant laboratory. We weren't even test subjects to them. We were just variables in whatever cosmic equation they were trying to solve. The display showed more images. Cities encased in strange energy fields. Entire regions subjected to altered physical laws, populations experiencing accelerated evolution under the Architect's incomprehensible influence. We tried fighting back, of course, Rodriguez said with a hint of pride. Every weapon, every strategy, every desperate plan we could conceive. Nothing worked. How could it? We were Stone Age primitives compared to them. Then how did you survive? Vizith asked, though her tone suggested she was beginning to understand. We adapted, Williams said simply. Not just biologically, though that happened too, thanks to their experiments. We adapted our entire way of thinking. When direct confrontation failed, we learned to work within the parameters of their experiments. When conventional weapons proved useless, we started studying how their technology interfaced with our reality. We turned their laboratory into our classroom, Thompson added. Every experiment they ran taught us something new. Every failure showed us a different approach. We learned to think in ways that would have been impossible before they arrived. Cathax's scientific mind raced with the implications. The way you approached the Ravager threat. You weren't just drawing on military experience or scientific knowledge. We were drawing on lessons learned from being lab rats in the most advanced experiment in human history, Rodriguez confirmed. The Architects never saw us as a threat. Why would they? We were just another variable to be measured and recorded. What happened to them? Vizith demanded. The humans exchanged glances. Finally, Thompson spoke. We don't know. One day they simply left. All their structures, all their experiments, everything just vanished. They never explained why they came, what they were looking for, or why they departed. But they left something behind, Williams continued. They left us, humanity, forever changed. Not just physically, but fundamentally. We had learned to think like them, to see patterns in chaos, to understand that the universe operates on levels we'd never imagined. And you think they'll return? Kathax asked, though he already knew the answer. We know they will, Rodriguez said firmly. Everything we've done since then, our rapid technological advancement, our unusual approaches to problem solving, our insistence on building cooperative relationships with other species, it's all been preparation for that day. The Ravagers, Vizith realized. They're just practice for you. In a way, Thompson acknowledged. Each challenge we face, each problem we solve, helps us refine our methods. The alliance we're building isn't just about defeating the Ravagers. It's about creating a cooperative framework that can face what's coming. Because when the architects return, Williams added, they won't find the same primitive species they left behind. They'll find humanity and its allies, ready to either greet them as equals or ensure that their next experiment yields unexpected results, Rodriguez finished. Kathax studied the humans with new understanding. Their persistent optimism, their seemingly illogical approaches, their constant drive to improve and adapt, it all made sense now. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were preparing for a reunion that would reshape the galaxy. The Alliance must be informed, Vizith declared. Not everything, not immediately, but they need to understand what we're truly preparing for. Agreed, Thompson said. But first, we have some Ravagers to deal with. After all, practice makes perfect. As they turned their attention back to the immediate threat, Kathax noticed something had changed in the command center's atmosphere. The humans moved with an even greater sense of purpose, and his own staff seemed to regard them with a new level of respect. They weren't just clever allies anymore. They were survivors of something that made the Ravagers look like a minor inconvenience. Dr. Thompson, Kathax said quietly as they reviewed the battle plans. Do you ever regret not telling us this sooner? Thompson smiled, but there was a weight behind it that Kathax had never noticed before. Admiral, if there's one thing the architects taught us, it's that timing is everything. The Alliance wasn't ready for this truth until it learned to think differently. Until it learned to see the universe the way we do. And now? Now, Thompson replied, turning back to the display showing the approaching Ravager fleet. Now we show the galaxy what humanity can really do when we're not holding back. Consider it a dress rehearsal for the performance of a lifetime. Kathax's facial tentacles arranged themselves into what had become his usual expression when dealing with humans, a mixture of exasperation, admiration, and growing anticipation. The Ravagers were coming, yes, but for the first time, Kathax truly understood why his human allies seemed so unconcerned. When you've survived being an unwitting participant in an experiment conducted by beings who could reshape reality itself, everything else was just another problem to solve. And humans, as it turned out, were very, very good at solving problems. The real question was, were the architects ready for what their experiments had created? Kathax had a feeling they were about to find out. The Joint Strategic Command Center erupted into activity as the first wave of evolved Ravager ships entered the outer defense perimeter. Admiral Kathax observed with professional interest as his human colleagues coordinated the Alliance's response with practiced efficiency. Phase 1 initiating, Dr. Williams announced, his fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces. Quantum interference patterns are aligned and synchronized with the crystalline matrices. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez stood at the tactical display, her expression focused as she directed fleet movements. Allied ships are in position. Remember, we're not trying to destroy them. Just keep them occupied while the interference field does its work. The scene unfolding before them was unlike any battle Kathax had witnessed in his 3 centuries of service. The Allied fleet, composed of vessels from a dozen different species, moved in patterns that seemed almost choreographed. They maintained precise distances from the Ravager ships, neither engaging directly nor retreating. Fascinating, Supreme Commander Vizith observed. They're reacting exactly as predicted. Indeed, the Ravager vessels were attempting to adapt to the Allied fleet's presence, their hybrid organic technological forms shifting and evolving in real time. But with each adaptation, They drew more heavily on their mimicry of Allied technology, particularly the crystalline computing systems they had incorporated into their biology. Energy expenditure in the Ravager fleet is increasing exponentially, Thompson reported. Their biological systems are working overtime to maintain technological integration. Phase 2 can commence on your order, Admiral. Kathax nodded, his tentacles arranged in what had become his game face, as the humans called it. Execute Phase 2. The quantum interference field activated, its effects invisible but devastating. The Ravager ship's crystalline components began to vibrate at frequencies that clashed with their biological systems. It wasn't enough to destroy them. That wasn't the point. Instead, it forced them to expend even more energy maintaining their evolved forms. They're trying to adapt around the interference, Williams noted with professional appreciation. Remarkable. Look at how they're attempting to restructure their crystalline matrices at the molecular level. How long can they maintain that level of energy expenditure? Kathax asked. At current rates, Rodriguez consulted her displays. Maybe another 30 minutes before they're forced to either retreat or risk complete systemic failure. Unless they surprise us, Thompson added. Which they might. The architects certainly taught us the value of keeping a few tricks in reserve. As if on cue, the Ravager fleet suddenly shifted formation. Their ships merged together, combining into larger structures that bore an unsettling resemblance to the geometric shapes the humans had shown in their historical records of the architects. Well, Williams said quietly, that's new. Vizith's bioluminescent patches pulsed with alarm. They're not just mimicking our current technology. They're accessing the evolutionary memories you warned us about, the changes the architects forced upon various species. Which means, Thompson concluded, they're about to try something dramatic. The merged Ravager ships began emitting energy patterns that interfered with the Alliance's quantum field. It wasn't enough to neutralize it completely, but it created gaps that other Ravager vessels quickly exploited. This, Rodriguez announced with grim satisfaction, is why we have contingency plans. She activated a secondary command interface, and new orders flashed across the Allied fleet's tactical networks. The ships responded immediately, shifting into formations that seemed chaotic at first glance but followed complex mathematical patterns. What you're seeing, Thompson explained to the increasingly agitated Zelaxian commanders, is something we learned during the Architect's experiments. When faced with a force that operates on multiple dimensional levels, traditional tactical responses become meaningless. Instead, you have to create patterns that exist simultaneously in multiple states. The fleet movements, Kathax realized. They're generating their own interference patterns, not through technology, but through pure positioning and momentum. Exactly, Williams confirmed. The Ravagers can adapt to our technology because they can absorb and mimic it, but they can't adapt to something that isn't technically there. A pattern that exists only in the space between ships, in the void itself. The effect was subtle at first, but rapidly became apparent. The Ravager megastructures began to lose cohesion, their attempt to mimic architect technology faltering as they encountered something they couldn't simply absorb and improve upon. They're trying to compensate, Rodriguez reported. Burning through energy reserves even faster now, 10 minutes to critical depletion. And then? Vizith asked. And then we find out if they're smart enough to retreat, or if we have to demonstrate why challenging humanity to an evolutionary arms race is a bad idea. Thompson's tone was light, but his expression was deadly serious. You have additional countermeasures prepared? Kathax inquired. Admiral, Rodriguez replied with a smile that reminded him uncomfortably of a predator. We have countermeasures for our countermeasures. The architects may have treated us like lab rats, but they taught us to be very, very thorough in our preparations. The next few minutes were tense as the Ravager fleet struggled against the invisible patterns being woven around them. Their attempts to adapt became increasingly erratic, each new evolution burning through more and more of their energy reserves. Finally, inevitably, they began to retreat. Should we pursue? One of Kathax's subordinates asked. No, Thompson said firmly. Let them go. Let them burn even more energy trying to maintain their evolved forms during the retreat. Let them return to whatever corner of space they call home, and think about what just happened. And then? Vizith prompted. And then, Rodriguez answered, we prepare for their next attempt, and the one after that. And we keep pushing them to evolve faster and faster, burning through their resources, until they either learn to communicate instead of simply attacking, Williams finished, or they exhaust themselves into extinction. Their choice. Kathax watched as the Ravager fleet disappeared into the darkness of space. You're not just fighting them, he said slowly. You're teaching them, like the architects taught you. With one crucial difference, Thompson corrected. We're giving them a choice. The architects never did that for us. As the command center began the process of standing down from battle stations, Kathax reflected on how much had changed in the past few months. The Alliance had faced its first true test against the evolved Ravagers and emerged victorious.